I still remember that night like it was burned into my memory. Every sound, every face, every lie echoing in that boardroom. The soft hum of the air conditioner, the flickering city lights outside the glass windows, and her voice, calm, confident, rehearsed, announcing that I was no longer the CEO of the company I built from scratch. "My decision is final," she said, her tone steady. "The board has voted. Effective immediately, Daniel's position as CEO will be terminated." For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Or maybe I'd heard wrong. Because the woman standing there, the woman I once loved, trusted, and built an empire with, couldn't possibly be doing this to me. I looked around the room. The faces of people I'd hired, mentored, celebrated with. None of them met my eyes. Not one. Some looked down at their laptops, pretending to type. Others sat frozen, silently agreeing to my exile. It felt like betrayal in slow motion. "Lena," I said, my voice trembling but controlled. "You can't do this. You and I founded this company together. Everything we have, the deals, the clients, the team, it all started with us." She didn't flinch. She didn't even look at me. "Business is business, Daniel," she said, flipping through her folder. "This isn't personal." But I could see in her eyes, it was personal. The woman I once held at night, who had whispered dreams into my ear, who promised we'd rule the world together, was now standing across from me, cold and ruthless, watching me fall apart like it meant nothing. The security guards entered quietly. I saw them out of the corner of my eye. My chest tightened. "Is this really happening?" I whispered. Lena gave a polite smile, the same one she used to give investors when she wanted to hide her true emotions. "Please don't make this difficult," she said softly. I didn't resist. I stood there, motionless, as they took my access card, my laptop, even my phone. It wasn't just humiliation. It was annihilation. Every dream I had built, every idea, every sleepless night, every sacrifice was being stripped away by the one person I trusted most. As I walked out of that glass building for the last time, I felt like my heart had been torn out of my chest. The city lights blurred behind the tears I refused to let fall. I didn't go home that night. I just walked, miles and miles, without knowing where I was headed. I thought about how it all began. The day I met her, the spark between us, the dreams we built together. How love turned into ambition, and ambition turned into greed. And somewhere deep down, beneath all the pain and disbelief, a thought began to form, quiet but sharp. She thinks she's won, but she has no idea what's coming. That night wasn't the end. It was the beginning of my revenge. I wasn't born into money. I wasn't handed a business or a shortcut or even a lucky break. Everything I had, I built from nothing, from late nights, cold coffee, and a stubborn belief that I was meant for more than just surviving. Back then, I was just another dreamer in a cheap apartment running a tech startup out of my living room. The walls were bare, the furniture mismatched, and the Wi-Fi barely worked half the time. But I had ideas, big ones, and a fire that wouldn't die out. That's when I met her, Lena Morgan. She wasn't like anyone I'd met before. Sharp, confident, magnetic, the kind of person who walked into a room and made you believe she already owned it. We met at a networking event downtown. I remember it vividly. She was giving a short pitch about branding strategies, and I couldn't stop watching her. The way she spoke, clear, fearless, calculated. She wasn't just talking. She was commanding. After her presentation, I introduced myself. "I'm Daniel Cole," I said, trying not to sound too nervous. "Loved your talk. You make marketing sound like an art form." She smiled. "And you make flattery sound like a sales pitch." We both laughed. And just like that, something clicked. That night turned into coffee the next day. Coffee turned into long talks, ideas, dreams, and eventually late nights building something that felt bigger than both of us. I had the product, a tech platform designed to help small businesses automate client management. She had the marketing mind, the vision, the words, the charm. Together, we were unstoppable. Within months, we had our first investor, then another. Lena was a magician in meetings. She knew how to turn skepticism into curiosity and curiosity into a signed check. And me? I was the builder, the guy who made the impossible happen behind the scenes. It was more than a partnership. It was chemistry. We worked side by side, days blending into nights, our desks littered with takeout boxes and empty coffee cups. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me, not as a business partner, but as something more. And eventually, it became that. Our work relationship melted into something personal, something deep. The first time she kissed me, it was after we signed our first six-figure deal. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. "You and me, we're going to build an empire." And I believed her. I believed every word. For 2 years, we were inseparable. We celebrated small wins like they were life-changing. We fought together through sleepless nights and setbacks. We even shared the same apartment. She'd fall asleep next to me with her laptop still open, slides for investor decks glowing on her screen. I'd close it gently, tuck her in, and smile, because I truly thought she was my forever. The company, Nexera, grew faster than we ever imagined. Within 3 years, we went from a cramped apartment to a glass office downtown. 20 employees, millions in funding, a real brand. And for a while, it felt perfect. But success changes people. Or maybe it just reveals who they really are. I started noticing little things. She'd take certain meetings alone. Don't worry about it, just client stuff. She'd make decisions without telling me. I thought you'd agree, so I went ahead. At first, I ignored it. We were both busy, exhausted, trying to hold everything together. But then the distance started growing, emotionally, not just professionally. She wasn't laughing as much. She was colder, sharper. And sometimes when I talk about long-term plans, expanding, scaling, maybe even marriage, she'd change the subject. I should have seen it. The signs were there. But love makes you blind. To me, she was still the woman who believed in me when no one else did. The one who looked at a broke dreamer and said, "I see something in you." So I trusted her. Completely. I didn't know that trust was the weapon she'd use against me. Back then, I thought the world was finally giving me everything I deserved. But what I didn't realize was that it was setting me up for the biggest fall of my life. The next 2 years were a blur of growth, pressure, and adrenaline. Every morning started before sunrise, and every night ended long after the janitors went home. But when you're chasing a dream, exhaustion feels like victory. Lena and I were unstoppable, or at least that's what everyone said. Investors wanted to meet us, clients asked for us, and media outlets called us the golden duo of tech. Every photo, every headline, every award, it was always Daniel and Lena. And for a while, I didn't mind sharing the spotlight. I thought we were equals. We'd built this empire together. She was the face, and I was the foundation. But as the company grew, I started noticing subtle shifts. Tiny things at first. She began taking credit for ideas we brainstormed together. In interviews, she'd say, "I came up with the campaign that changed our trajectory." Or when clients praised our software, she'd smile and say, "Yes, I had a feeling it would work." At first, I brushed it off. She was under pressure, dealing with media. But deep down, a small voice whispered, "She likes the power." And once someone tastes power, they never stop craving more. Still, we were thriving. Our product, Nexera, became the go-to software for mid-sized companies. We signed clients I used to only dream about. We even got invited to speak at conferences. I remember one night, We were celebrating our third anniversary as a company at a rooftop bar. The city lights stretched endlessly, music pulsing in the background. She raised her glass. "To us," she said, her smile gleaming. "To the empire we built." I smiled back. "To the empire we'll keep building." For a moment, everything felt right again. Her eyes softened, her hand touched mine, and the world felt small and safe. But then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, and something changed. Her expression stiffened. "I need to take this," she said quickly, stepping away. I didn't think much of it. But when she came back 15 minutes later, her mood was different, colder, distracted. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. As months went by, she became more controlling, not just with the company, but with me. She'd question my decisions, override my calls, rewrite my presentations before I could deliver them. When I confronted her, she'd smile and say, "Relax, Daniel. I'm just making sure we don't screw up. You know how emotional you can get." It was subtle, but cut deep. She'd started undermining me, not in public, not yet, but behind closed doors. And the worst part? Everyone in the office could feel the shift. I went from being her equal to being her shadow. Meetings I used to lead, she led now. Emails that used to come to both of us started coming to her alone. When employees had questions, they asked her first. At some point, she changed her email signature. Lena Morgan, co-founder and CEO. I stared at that line for a long time the first time I saw it. CEO. She hadn't discussed it. She hadn't even mentioned it. Just decided it. Like I didn't matter. The night I brought it up, she didn't even look guilty. We were at home, both exhausted after a long day. I held up my phone with one of her recent press releases open. "CEO?" I asked quietly. "When did we decide that?" She sighed. "Daniel, please. You hate doing interviews. You hate the spotlight. It just makes sense. That's not the point. We built this together." "Exactly," she said. "So stop being so sensitive. We're a team, right?" But the way she said team, it didn't sound like a promise. It sounded like a dismissal. And something inside me cracked that night. I didn't argue, but I stopped trusting her. Then came the gala, a fancy industry event where we were being honored for innovation. Hundreds of people, champagne glasses, fake smiles. When they called us on stage, the host said, "Please welcome the visionary behind Nexera, Ms. Lena Morgan." My heart sank. There was my name, small on the banner, next to hers, but it didn't matter. All eyes were on her. All credit was hers. And when she started her speech, she didn't even thank me. Not once. That's when I realized she wasn't my partner anymore. She was positioning herself for something bigger, something without me in it. I should have confronted her right then, but I didn't, because a part of me still loved her, loved the memory of who she was, the girl who once sat on the floor eating noodles with me while we dreamed about success. But that girl was gone. The woman standing beside me now, she didn't want love. She wanted control. I didn't know it yet, but while I was still holding on to us, she was already planning my downfall. And when it came, it would be so perfectly executed that not even I would see it coming. You can always feel it when something starts to break. It's not sudden, it's slow. A subtle shift. A silence that stretches too long. A smile that doesn't reach the eyes. That's how it began between Lena and me. She wasn't cruel. Not first. Just different. Less warmth. Less laughter. More walls. Her voice became colder during meetings. Her emails shorter. Her patience thinner. And the company, our company, started to feel like it was hers alone. One Monday morning, I walked into the conference room for a strategy meeting. Lena was already there with 3 board members. They all went silent when I entered. "Sorry," I said, smiling awkwardly. "Didn't know we started early." Lena looked up from her notes. "It's fine. We were just discussing some restructuring ideas." "Restructuring?" I repeated. "Without me." It's just early brainstorming, she said quickly. Don't overthink it. But the looks on their faces told a different story. I recognized those kinds of looks, cautious, diplomatic, like they'd been warned not to say too much. I sat down, pretending to take notes, but my mind was racing. She'd started locking me out of key decisions, and I had no idea how deep it went. That week, I tried to confront her. We were working late again, the office half empty, city lights shimmering against the glass walls. Lena, I began carefully. I feel like you've been cutting me out lately. The meetings, the clients, I'm not even copied on half the updates anymore. She didn't even look up from her laptop. Daniel, don't start this again. I'm serious. Something's changed. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes were sharp, impatient. You're paranoid, she said. You've been distracted for months. Maybe the board just trusts me to handle things more efficiently. Efficiently? I repeated, my voice rising. You mean without me? She slammed her laptop shut. God, listen to yourself. This is why I don't tell you everything. You overreact. I stared at her, stunned. I overreact? I built this company. And I saved it, she snapped. Do you even remember how close we were to losing investors last year? You froze, Daniel. You panicked. I'm the reason we're still here. Her words cut deep, because part of me believed them. She stood up, brushing past me toward the door. I'm not doing this right now, she muttered. Go home. Get some rest. And just like that, the conversation was over. But that night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room, staring at the old Nexra logo I'd drawn years ago, the symbol of everything we'd built together. And I wondered, had I really lost her? Or had I just never truly known who she was? Over the next few weeks, things got worse. She started traveling investor trips, she called them, but she wouldn't tell me who she was meeting. Sometimes she'd come back distant, avoiding eye contact, her phone buzzing constantly with messages she never explained. When I asked, she'd laugh and say, "You've got to stop being so suspicious. It's not a good look." That line, "not a good look," became her weapon. Every time I pushed for answers, she'd make me feel small, insecure, crazy. And that's how she gained total control, by making me doubt myself. One evening, I stayed late at the office after she left. Something inside me told me to check her desk. I hesitated. It felt wrong, but curiosity and fear got the better of me. In her drawer, beneath a stack of folders, I found a printed document. Board restructuring proposal, confidential. I skimmed through it, my heart pounding faster with every line. It proposed changes to the company's voting structure, giving her majority control. My shares would be diluted, my decision-making power reduced. And at the bottom, I saw the signatures of 3 board members. They'd already signed it. My name wasn't there. I hadn't even been told. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the paper, feeling the room spin around me. Then I heard the elevator ding. Footsteps. Lena's voice. I quickly put everything back and sat down, pretending to be working. She walked in, surprised to see me still there. "Wow," she said with that same soft smile she used to disarm people. "Still here?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. Couldn't sleep. She came over, leaned against my desk. "You've been so tense lately. You should really learn to relax." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw it. The calmness, the confidence, the certainty in her eyes. She already knew. She knew I'd eventually find out. And she wasn't afraid, because she'd already won. That night, I went home and stared out the window until sunrise. I thought about the years we spent together, the late nights, the laughter, the shared dreams. And I realized something painful. She had never loved me. She loved what I could build, what I could give her. And now that she had it all, I was just expendable. But I wasn't done. Not yet. If she wanted to play this game, I'd play it better. I started documenting everything. Every deal, every file, every unexplained meeting. I created backups, stored emails, printed copies of confidential proposals. Because something inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time, was waking up, not the hopeful dreamer I once was, but something colder, sharper. The version of me she created, the one who'd stop at nothing. I didn't know it then, but that quiet decision to start watching her, tracking her, was the first step toward the revenge that would one day destroy her. There are moments that sear into your memory, the ones you replay until they become a movie you can't stop watching. The moment she stabbed me was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, paperwork and signatures, a polite email, a handshake. That's what made it worse. It started with a board meeting scheduled for a Thursday morning. I wasn't worried at first. I thought, naively, that by now we would at least discuss things, equity, roles, the stupid email signatures. I believed in process. I believed in us. When I walked into the boardroom that morning, the air felt different. There was a tension under the hum of the projector, like electricity before a storm. The chairs were arranged differently. The table looked farther away than usual. Lena was already there, pristine as ever. Tailored suit, hair pulled back, a smile that had no warmth. The investors sat around her like a half circle. I recognized the expressions. Neutral, professional, practiced concern. They weren't there to support me. They were there to be convinced. "Good morning," she said, and the smiling was a performance only she needed to give. "Morning," I answered. My voice sounded small in that room. I sat down and opened my laptop. The first slide on the screen was a quarterly projection, numbers meant to soothe. But the next slide was different. The title read, "Proposed Corporate Reorganization, Board Vote." My chest tightened. She began to speak, flawless and calm. She framed it as a forward step, streamlining operations, maintaining investor confidence, protecting long-term value. She used words the investors loved: governance, alignment, fiduciary duty. She painted a picture of stability, of protection, of inevitability. Every sentence was designed to sound like progress. Every sentence required a vote. Then she turned to me and said, softly, "Daniel, this is about what's best for Nexera." I wanted to stand up and shout, but this was our dream. You promised. But I'd rehearsed my restraint for weeks. I'd learned to document, to watch, to gather. So I kept silent and watched her do what she did best, command the room. They asked questions. She answered them. When the board began to speak, one by one, they nodded towards her. They asked about risk mitigation, future funding, her vision for scaling internationally. She had answers for everything and presented them like certainties, not proposals. When it came time to vote, she didn't ask for opinions. She asked for signatures. They passed the restructuring. The terms were surgical. Certain voting rights would shift to a new class of shares. A clause would allow the board to appoint an interim CEO in the event of operational misalignment. She had already negotiated those interim powers with outside counsel months ago and quietly placed them in the proposal. My heart beat like a trapped animal. "Daniel," she said with that same cool tone, "we need you to sign off for documentation. Just administrative." I stared at the paper on the table. It looked official, benign, lines and boxes, a place for my name. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen. My mind shouted for me not to sign. My mouth felt dry. But the document before me was presented as a housekeeping measure. And the board, so many faces I trusted, watched politely. They weren't expecting drama. I put my signature on the line. That single stroke was the most expensive thing I had ever made. Within 24 hours, the new share class was activated. The clause was used to appoint an interim CEO. The board, citing the newly approved governance framework, announced that before a transition, they recommended a temporary leadership arrangement to stabilize operations. The investors publicly praised Lena for her decisive action. And then the email came. Effective immediately, my role as CEO would be suspended pending an independent review. I was escorted from the building that afternoon. The security guard who once greeted me by name checked my badge and asked me to hand over my devices. I walked through the lobby like someone invisible. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. She sent a short message to the staff. We're moving forward with a plan to protect the company's future. They clapped politely and moved on. It was methodical, clean, hurtful in a way I wasn't prepared for. I called her. She didn't pick up. I texted. A red receipt that felt like another blade. I kept asking why, and the answers are the same rehearsed rhetoric. Governance, fiduciary responsibility, investor confidence. When I finally saw her, in a meeting room that felt like glass and ice, she didn't look at me like the woman who once cried when we lost a client. She looked at me like a professional looking at a problem. Assess, mitigate, move forward. What? I asked. My voice was thin. Why not tell me? She folded her hands. We try to be careful. We try to do this without making it messy for you. Her eyes were cold but soft at the corners, as if she'd trained herself to remember mercy while doing harm. You call this mercy? I whispered. She leaned forward, unexpectedly sincere. You've been distracted, Daniel. Decisions are being delayed. We have investors pressing. I have to act. I did what was necessary. It was possible she believed some of it. She was brilliant at creating a narrative that made her choice seem inevitable, even righteous. When the news hit the industry feeds, a leadership shakeup at Nexera, I watched the world from the outside. The press framed it as a tough but necessary decision. Friends messaged to offer sympathy. Some sent condolences disguised as advice. Maybe take some time. Heal. The words stung. What hurt more than losing my job was seeing her on stage 3 days later, smiling, composed, delivering a speech about resilience and vision. People cheered. Her eyes scanned the crowd and fixed on mine for a heartbeat. No recognition there. Or worse, recognition without regret. At night, in the small apartment I rented after they reclaimed our shared space, I replayed the meeting in my head. Every phrase she used, every board member's nod, every polite clap, and with every replay, an icy sensation settled into my ribs. This was not a mistake. It was planned, beautifully, ruthlessly, executed like a surgeon with perfectly steady hands. The betrayal didn't just cost me a title. It cost me my dignity. The team I'd mentored, the product I'd coded, the clients who trusted our name. Many of them remained, but the soul of what we built was gone. Anger came first, hot, red, blinding. Then a deeper sorrow, the hurt of loving someone who had perfected the art of turning love into leverage. I wanted to break things, to scream at her, to throw the documents in the air and watch them scatter like confetti. Instead, I wept in the dark, quietly, for the life I thought I deserved. But beneath the shock and the grief, a different feeling slowly formed. It wasn't immediate. It was quieter, sharper. It felt like the beginning of a plan. A cold, patient resolve settling into the bones. She thought she had removed an obstacle. She thought she had silenced me. She hadn't counted on what deserts do to a man. They strip him down until he finds what's left at the center. I was empty, but I was not finished. That night, I didn't sleep. I gathered what I could. Old backups, legal documents I had duplicated, emails I'd printed when I first felt the shift. I stored them where she would never think to look. I called a lawyer I could trust, someone who still remembered me before Nexera's fame. I wrote a list. It was simple, brutal, and honest. Expose the truth, rebuild, reclaim. She had taken everything, and she had done it with a smile. But she had left me something else, a wound that would not heal until justice or vengeance made it right. When revenge becomes the only oxygen you can breathe, you start planning like a chess player who has lost his king. You start counting moves ahead, anticipating counters, building contingencies. You stop being the man she thought she could bury, and you begin to create the version of yourself she never saw coming. After they closed the door on me at Nexera, the world felt quieter, not peaceful, just hollow. The noises that used to mean progress now sounded like reminders of what I'd lost. The ping of Slack messages, the hum of servers, even the clack of a coffee cup against my desk. All of it belonged to a life I was suddenly shut out from. The first weeks were the worst. People I trusted slowed their calls and then stopped answering altogether. My phone filled with messages from distant acquaintances. Heard about Nexera. Hope you're okay. They were sympathetic in tone, but empty in action. The colleagues who'd once laughed at my bad jokes now avoided me like a rumor. Money wasn't immediate trouble. I had some savings, and a few friends quietly wired help when they could. But dignity, that vanishing thread you don't notice until it's gone, slipped away faster than anything else. Invitations dried up. Investors who used to fight over our demo slots now returned emails with polite formality, never an open door. Sleep refused me. When I did sleep, the dreams were sharp and public, her voice echoing in boardrooms, signatures sharpened like knives. I woke with the taste of metal in my mouth and a sense that the world had tilted. I tried to keep a daily routine at first. I went for long runs at dawn, telling myself movement would straighten my head. I read books I put off for years. I called my mother more than usual and listened to the warm anchor of a voice that had never asked for equity, never asked for pitch decks, only for me. That helped for a while. But grief is a slow animal. It curls up in the quiet corners. It eats steadily. When the initial shock faded, shame and anger filled the space. I replayed the betrayal over and over, dissecting every phrase, every smile, every absent thank you. I asked myself how I could be so blind. How could I sign that paper? How could I have loved someone who would weaponize affection? There was a moment, a long, hollow evening, when I walked past the old Nexera building. From across the street, the glass looked like a mirror to another life. Through the windows, silhouettes moved, teams planning, voices collaborating. I felt like an exiled king watching a parade of strangers in his palace. I sat on the curb until the streetlights buzzed and went dim. Friends tried to help. They offered distractions, dinners, poker nights, weekend getaways. I accepted some, but joy felt like a foreign language. Conversations skimmed the surface and never dove into what I needed to say. People wanted to be helpful, but didn't know how to hold a man whose identity had been peeled away in public. I also had to face the legal reality. Lena's move had been surgical, and the company's lawyers were exact. My lawyer, a steady, blunt woman named Priya, who had once represented my first client, laid it out plainly over coffee. "You're not the first founder to be edged out," she said. "But these things can be undone if there's evidence. You need documents, witnesses, a timeline." I had some of that. Backups I made before suspicion became obsession. Emails I printed. Notes I'd kept in a leather journal. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to open a paper trail. Priya warned me the legal fight would be long and expensive. It could ruin me in other ways. The public, she said, likes clean stories, heroes or villains, rarely both. The truth is messy. The truth rarely fits the headlines. I signed a retainer anyway. Filing a lawsuit felt like admitting I couldn't just scream into the void and expect justice. It felt like stepping into a long tunnel with no guarantee of light at the other end. But it was action, and after weeks of paralysis, action was oxygen. Even with the lawsuit filed, life didn't immediately right itself. The media loved a narrative, and Nextra's PR team had perfected one necessary leadership transition during a growth phase. Reporters accepted the statement and moved on. The nuance, the months of secret votes, the forged appearance of consensus rarely made it past the press release. Most people were satisfied with the tidy version. It was easier that way. Bank accounts and small comforts weren't my main worry. It was the erosion of self. When your work is your identity, being removed from it feels like being erased from your own story. I couldn't walk down certain streets without expecting a face to turn and whisper, "There goes the guy who lost it all." Pride is ugly when it becomes a burden. In the solitude, I confronted other failures, the relationships I neglected for the sake of late nights, the family events I skipped, the promises to myself I postponed. I cataloged them quietly, like someone compiling a will. Pain rearranged my priorities. The dream of revenge, which felt childish at first, grew into a necessary instrument, not just to punish Lena, but to reclaim integrity. Revenge without meaning is cruelty. Revenge with direction becomes a tool to rebuild. I found solace in small things. A neighbor's dog that needed walking. A bookstore where the owner would chat for hours about novels and music. Oddly, the mundane rebuilt me in ways I didn't expect. I started to notice details I'd overlooked when ambition blinded me. Laughter between strangers walking in a park, the quiet concentration of a barista, the stubborn way sunlight found through blinds. On the legal front, Priya and I began to map strategy. We organized documents chronologically, noting dates of meetings, email chains, and signatures. We subpoenaed certain communications. We quietly reached out to a few former board members who'd been sidelined by Lena's maneuvers. Some refused to speak. Fear of burning bridges and legal exposure kept them silent. Others were willing to remember, not out of loyalty to me, but because they felt uneasy and wanted to see if truth had a path forward. It was slow work, painstaking, but progress, even inch by inch, felt like a heartbeat returning to the chest. I also started teaching again, a small course at a local university about startup growth and ethical leadership. Standing in that classroom, talking about mistakes and the responsibility of founders, I saw in students' eyes a raw hunger I remembered in myself. Teaching gave me purpose. It reminded me that knowledge shared is never lost. It also reminded me that my value went beyond a title, beyond a logo on glass. Rebuilding isn't glamorous. It's grinding. It's waking up and doing one more small thing you promised yourself yesterday. I spent nights rewiring code bases I'd once thought finished, mornings drafting letters, afternoons in discovery sessions with counsel. I was no longer the loud founder on stage, but I was a man who could be patient for the long game. And in that patience, something else happened. The armor around my pain thickened, transforming into focus. The aim of revenge shifted from mere retaliation to calculated rectification. I wanted to expose what happened, yes, but I also wanted to teach a lesson. That power taken by manipulation can be reclaimed by truth. One night, months after that first meeting where I signed my fade away, I opened my laptop and reviewed the first documents I'd saved when suspicion began. The paper trail was messy, but the pattern emerged like a map. It showed timelines that contradicted the public narrative. It revealed meetings that had been kept secret. It named people who'd been nudged into compliance with promises and pressure I could now begin to prove. I told myself, quietly, in the lonesome hours when the city slept and the world had forgotten me, this ends differently. Not for petty revenge, but for justice. For the part of me that still believes in building something honest. And even though the path ahead was harsh and uncertain, I felt a steadier pulse under my skin, less the burning red of immediate rage and more the cold, patient heat of someone who knows what they will do and will not be stopped by shame or solitude. Hitting rock bottom taught me a dangerous thing. When everything else is stripped away, the only measure left is what you decide to build in the ruins. When you've been knocked out, the smartest thing to do isn't to roar back immediately. It's to be quiet, to listen, to learn the rhythm of the room you were forced out of. Revenge that rushes is revenge that fails. The kind that works is patient, surgical, and invisible until the moment it lands. I spent months doing the invisible work. While Lena gave speeches and smiled for cameras, I rebuilt in basements, in coffee shops, in classrooms. I stopped trying to be loud. I became deliberate. The first step was accepting that I couldn't win by repeating old moves. Nexera wasn't just a product. It was a story that people had already bought. I needed to create a new story, one that would slowly peel away the sheen Lena had painted over our shared past. I started with people, not the ones who clapped at public events, but the ones who had been overlooked. Engineers who once burned the midnight oil with me, the designer who still had mock-ups from our early days, a junior account manager who had quietly built relationships with several key clients. They weren't interested in headlines. They wanted meaning, stability, and someone who remembered how to keep promises. I offered them something simple: respect, clarity, and a chance to build again without ego. They joined me quietly, not because I was charismatic or because I promised overnight riches, but because I treated them like humans when no one else did. That mattered. Loyalty counted for more than money in those late nights. Next, I sharpened the legal blade. Priya was relentless. We found small discrepancies in the way certain memos were routed, timestamps that didn't align, and versions of presentations that suggested decisions had been shaped before they were discussed. We started building a chain of facts, not hyperbole, but verifiable items that, when pieced together, told a narrative different from the one Nexera's PR had sold. We also worked on a public strategy. The truth is messy, and courts move slowly. If I wanted to reclaim anything, I needed the public to start asking questions. But I couldn't be accusatory without proof. So we created a parallel path. Build something better and let the market do what it always does. Vote with contracts and trust. My team and I began developing a product that fixed the very vulnerabilities Nexera had introduced. We called it Hearth. The name sounded modest on purpose, a reminder of what business should feel like: dependable, warm, and human. The tech was different. We prioritized transparency, user control, and simple contracts that clients could actually understand. Where Nexera had become a black box of terms and restrictive clauses, Hearth would be clear and client-first. We worked lean. There were no extravagant launches, no PR blitzes, just disciplined product sprints and honest demos. We tested with small clients who were quietly frustrated with Nexera's direction, companies that felt abandoned by the bureaucracy Lena's leadership created. They loved the simplicity. They loved being heard. Word spread slowly. In business, reputation is compound interest. Small trusted wins multiply. Little by little, Hearth signed clients who had once been staples in our pitch decks at Nexera. It was not dramatic. It was steady. Every new client was a small redemption, a tiny reclamation of what I'd lost. Parallel to product building, I started playing the game of optics carefully. I spoke at smaller industry gatherings about ethics and scaling startups, not as an attack, but as a cautionary lesson. I shared my story in measured tones, focused on lessons learned rather than vendettas. Those talks earned respect among founders and investors who admired restraint and clarity. I became a voice that people could trust because I spoke about failure with ownership. But product and optics weren't enough. I needed cracks in the armor of Lena's public image. That's where careful investigation came in. Not the dramatic expose you see on TV, but methodical digging. procurement documents that suggested preferential contracts, email threads that suggested certain board members had been rushed, and versions of shareholder agreements that contradicted what was publicly stated. I didn't leak. I stored. We prepared. Priya cross-checked everything. When you play chess with powerful people, a single improvised move can undo your whole strategy. We had to be ironclad. At the same time, I cultivated allies in unexpected places. An old mentor connected me with a quiet investor who distrusted sandbagging founders, someone who preferred principles over PR. He began to quietly fund certain development sprints and introduced us to board members at other startups who had seen the same tactics used in different rooms. Another ally, a former Nexer operations lead, provided insights into internal processes that made the discrepancies we'd found easier to demonstrate. I also kept close tabs on Lena's moves, not out of obsession, but necessity. Her arrogance was a resource. She had started to believe her own narrative. She grew bolder, taking bigger risks. Publicly, she doubled down on grand strategies and expansion. Privately, she moved faster than governance could handle. That speed left footprints. We learned to read them. One evening, months into the plan, a junior developer on my team found an old commit in a public Git repo where a Nexer engineer had accidentally pushed a script containing metadata that matched one of the hidden clauses we discovered. It was small and careless, a breadcrumb. But in our world, breadcrumbs map a forest. That commit, cross-referenced with internal memos and client emails, created a bridge between the decision-making timeline and the structural changes Lena had orchestrated. Small things add up. Proof multiplies when it's collected patiently. We approached a journalist I trusted, someone who had covered startups honestly and wasn't interested in sensationalism. We presented a tightly curated packet, documents, non-hearsay testimony, metadata. We asked the journalist to look for the truth, not to be our megaphone. He did. The first piece he wrote wasn't an accusation. It was a question about governance in VC-backed companies and how founders can be sidelined without public scrutiny. He used anonymized examples, but clearly framed the issue in a way that echoed our findings. When that article ran, it didn't bring down a company, but it changed the tone. Investors who had been passive began to ask questions. Clients started to request clarifications in their contracts. Board members who had been cowed by charisma found a reason to speak up. Hearth's growth accelerated at a pace our lean operation could handle. That steadiness mattered. Stability was the counterweight to Lena's theatrics. Meanwhile, contrarian opinions and quiet doubts about Nexer's governance began to surface in investor calls. The market does not forget competence. When clients and investors start to see an alternative that's credible, they shift. The legal pieces we'd been assembling were moving too. Priya filed targeted motions that forced certain documents into discovery and obliged private counsel to disclose communications previously hidden behind privilege claims. Lawyers are slow, but they are effective when the facts are strong. Our approach was surgical, not about spectacle, but about forcing clarity. There were moments of danger. Once, a smear attempt surfaced, an anonymous blog claiming I'd mismanaged funds years earlier. It was a gut punch, but we were ready. We published transparent records, offered interviews with third-party accountants, and turned the smear into proof of a campaign against me. Smears can derail plans, but they can also reveal the desperation of your opponent. That moment told me Lena was worried. What kept me steady through all this was a simple rule. Do not become what you despise. I had watched her weaponize charm and narratives to take everything. I refused to weaponize cruelty. My plan was not to humiliate her publicly, but to restore what was fair and to make sure the truth fit into the public record. As Hearth grew, as legal threads tightened, and as public curiosity shifted from applause to questions, Lena began to make mistakes. Overconfidence breeds sloppiness. Certainty breeds exposure. My comeback wasn't one big thunderclap. It was an accumulation of small, precise moves, product wins, legal pressure, and public credibility. The payoff wouldn't be immediate, but that was the point. The kind of revenge I was building required time. It required a steady hand and an honest core. And more than anything, it required me to be better than the man who'd been blindsided in a glass boardroom. The night before our first major product announcement, I sat on the roof of a small building, looking at the city lights. I had a notebook, the same leather one where I first sketched Nexra's logo years ago. The page was filled with small checkboxes, each one a task completed. Under them, a single line read, "Not just revenge. Rebuild right." I closed the book and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Quiet confidence. The kind that didn't need applause. The kind that just knew the next move and trusted in the slow pull of consequence. In the morning, we would show the world Hearth. Not as an attack, but as proof that there was another way. And somewhere between the product rollout, the tightening legal noose, and the growing industry whispers, Lena would start to realize that taking everything from me didn't make her invincible. It only set a smarter adversary in motion. That was the point the boardroom hadn't planned for. When you underestimate the person you buried, you plant the seed of your own undoing. The day it finally began, everything felt calm, deceptively calm. I had rehearsed the sequence in my head for months, replaying it until every timing, every phrase, every document was exact. Hearth was ready, the legal strategy was airtight, and the public narrative was poised to shift. All that remained was execution. I remember walking into the small conference room where my team and Priya waited. The air smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. Mundane smells, but comforting. They knew what was coming. The tension was there, but it was shared. Unlike at Nexra, this was my team, and I wasn't fighting alone. First, Hearth's launch. It was designed to be elegant, unassuming, but powerful. We invited key clients, investors, and journalists. The product demonstration was simple. Transparency at every step. Users could track contracts, payments, and commitments in real time. Features that had caused frustration at Nexra were solved. Every detail was a reminder of what could have been, every functionality a quiet statement. Competence survives betrayal. During the demo, I noticed subtle glances from industry insiders who had worked with Nexra. Their expressions were telling: surprise, intrigue, and, most importantly, comparison. They saw Hearth's elegance against Nexra's bloated structure. That reaction was priceless, though silent. By mid-afternoon, the legal piece activated. Priya had filed additional motions, revealing the internal documents we had collected, including email chains, board memos, and the metadata from that careless Git commit. The filings didn't use inflammatory language. They simply presented facts. Dates, signatures, inconsistencies, each item clearly contradicting the narrative that Nexra's leadership transition had been purely voluntary or benevolent. The press caught wind quickly. Headlines started with questions: founder removed, was Nexra's leadership transition ethical, and board dynamics at Nexra under scrutiny. Social media stirred, and investors began calling internal meetings to reassess governance. Every ripple was intentional, designed to unbalance Lena's control without appearing aggressive. Then came the subtle internal fractures. Board members, previously silent, now had a reason to speak up. Emails leaked internally, not by me, but by those uncomfortable with Lena's methods. Discrepancies appeared in internal Slack channels. Employees who had felt overlooked began quietly supporting external audits. Confidence in her leadership began to wobble, imperceptibly at first. Meanwhile, I maintained a low profile. Hearth's success and the growing legal pressure were enough. I didn't need to gloat. The key was visibility without desperation, presence without overt aggression. Lena naturally underestimated me. She had grown arrogant, accustomed to her charm masking any misstep. She didn't suspect the quiet groundwork of months had created a network of pressure points around her. And then, the climax, a carefully timed press briefing organized by the board under legal advisement. The topic was governance, oversight, and the recent discrepancies flagged in internal audits. Lena entered, expecting a controlled narrative in her favor, confident in her mastery of optics. But the questions came sharply. Board members referred to memos she had submitted unilaterally. Emails contradicted her public statements. Investors asked pointed questions about timing, signatures, and the restructuring process. She smiled as always, but this time it was a thin veneer. The room sensed a shift. She faltered briefly, enough for seasoned eyes to notice. Facts accumulated around her like shadows, each contradiction tighter than the last. It was then I allowed myself to speak. Calm, collected, no theatrics. I want to clarify one thing, I said, voice steady. These documents, these timelines, and these decisions were made without my knowledge or consent. They directly contradict the representations given to our investors, our employees, and the public. Gasps, subtle but present. Eyes flicked toward me. Lena's face tightened, the smile fracturing. I continued, I never objected publicly because I believed in due process. But transparency is a core principle, and it's time to set the record straight. The room was silent, not because they feared me, but because the facts were undeniable. The curated perfection she had built was cracking under the weight of documented truth. She tried to respond. Daniel, you're twisting words. But every retort she had prepared was neutralized by evidence. The emails, memos, timestamps, and witness statements made arguments impossible. No charisma could substitute for documented proof. By the end of the meeting, the board requested an immediate review of her decisions. Investors withheld approval for any major initiatives until clarity was provided. Employees whispered about compliance and governance reviews. Her empire, carefully curated over months, was quietly destabilizing. Outside, media coverage was controlled but growing. Analysts began comparing Hearth and Nexra publicly. Hearth, the underdog, suddenly looked stable, ethical, and competent. Nexra, led by someone who had mismanaged trust, looked brittle and self-serving. Weeks later, the legal filings culminated in formal investigations. Certain contracts Lena had authorized were voided or renegotiated. Board votes she had manipulated were scrutinized and, in some cases, reversed. Her control over Nexra diminished as checks and oversight returned. What struck me most wasn't the damage to her public persona. Though that was satisfying, it was the precision. Every step I had taken was deliberate. Patient accumulation of credibility, meticulous evidence gathering, calculated product success, and strategic public exposure. I had rebuilt not just what I lost, but a framework that made future betrayal impossible. The day she was formally removed as CEO by the very governance she had once manipulated, I watched from a distance. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting, just quiet acknowledgement. Her face was composed in public, but those who watched closely saw the falter, the subtle tightening of the jaw, the realization that control is only temporary when built on deception. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Justice, when executed with patience and precision, speaks louder than words. In the following months, Hearth flourished. Our user base grew steadily, investor confidence returned, and our team remained loyal. I rebuilt not just professionally, but personally, strengthened by the lessons of trust, patience, and resilience. And Lena? She faded from prominence in the circles she once dominated. Not humiliated in spectacle, but carefully and quietly undone by the tools she had underestimated: evidence, patience, and the will of someone she thought powerless. The hardest part of revenge is what comes after. When you spend months, even years, building a plan around betrayal, finally reaching the finish line doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels quieter, cleaner, almost strange. I sat in my office at Hearth one evening, the city lights stretching like a river of gold beyond the window. The company was thriving. Our team was loyal and energized, and the clients we had painstakingly courted were finally recognizing the difference. A culture built on honesty, respect, and accountability. And yet, something else lingered in my chest, a residue of all I had lost. I thought about Nexera, about Lena, about the meetings where her smile first began to feel sharp instead of warm. I thought about signing that fateful paper that had nearly destroyed everything I'd worked for. And I thought about the countless nights spent in isolation, questioning myself, questioning the world. I realized then that revenge is never just about the other person. It's about reclaiming yourself. It's about proving, first and foremost, to yourself that you are not powerless, that you can rise even when everything around you falls apart. And I had. Hearth wasn't just a company anymore. It was a symbol of everything that betrayal tried to take from me and failed. Every line of code, every client call, every carefully considered decision was a statement. I would not be broken. I would not be erased. The public recognition was gradual, not instant. Hearth's reputation grew organically, first through word of mouth, then through small industry features, and finally through analysts who compared our structure, ethics, and transparency against Nexera's. Each comparison quietly exposed what Lena had taken from me and what she had underestimated: patience, competence, and the unwavering commitment to doing things right. I never needed to announce her mistakes. The world noticed on its own. Investors, clients, and colleagues all began asking questions. The pressure built, not through spectacle, but through quiet accountability. And yet, despite all the satisfaction, I felt an unexpected emotion: forgiveness. Not for her, but for myself. For allowing myself to trust blindly. For allowing ambition and love to cloud judgment. For believing that the person I loved could never hurt me. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's clarity. It's the ability to close a chapter without letting bitterness rule the next one. I forgave myself for the mistakes, so I could fully appreciate the lessons. I also discovered something important. Resilience isn't about holding on to anger. It's about building something stronger than the pain you endured. Hearth became more than a company. It became a community. Our team, once small and tentative, now thrived on trust, collaboration, and mutual respect. Employees who had felt overlooked found their voices. Clients felt seen and heard. Investors respected transparency. And I, after months of reflection, finally felt that old spark of excitement for creation, untainted by fear or betrayal. Life outside of business returned too. I rebuilt friendships that had faded during the hustle. I began exercising regularly again, not just for health, but to feel alive in my body. I traveled briefly to places I'd postponed visiting during my obsession with growth. The world felt bigger, fuller, and more meaningful. And love? That would come again. But this time, I understood the difference between genuine connection and opportunistic attachment. I had learned to read intentions, and more importantly, I had learned to protect myself emotionally without building walls. The moral of the story, I realized, isn't revenge itself. Revenge is a response, a tool, not a life's purpose. The real victory lies in reclaiming agency, rebuilding integrity, and refusing to let betrayal define you. Some might say I went too far, or that revenge tarnishes the soul. But in my case, it was necessary. Without it, Lena's actions would have rewritten the narrative entirely. With it, I reclaimed my story, restored justice, and in doing so, regained myself. The final lesson was simple yet profound. Power taken through deception is never secure, and patience, integrity, and deliberate action can turn even the deepest betrayal into a triumph. I remember the first evening hearth became fully self-sustaining. I sat on the rooftop of our small office building, looking at the lights. I thought about the man I had been, naive, trusting, bruised, and the man I had become, cautious, deliberate, and unshakable. The scars of betrayal remained, of course. They always will, but they no longer define me. Instead, they were reminders of the lessons learned, the resilience earned, and the life rebuilt from ruins. I smiled quietly. The city didn't cheer, and no cameras recorded the moment. But in that silence, I felt something far more powerful than public recognition: peace. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I had not only survived betrayal, but I had turned it into my greatest strength.